Hi, I'm Dan Poblocki. You are listening to Our First Fears, a podcast about gateway horror, past and present, with creators currently working in the genre. If all goes as planned, this episode will be launching on October 31st, 2023, also known as Halloween here in the US and many other parts of the world, which is serendipitous because Sara Farizan, author of the recent horror novel Dead Flip, is here to talk with me about the 1982 cult film Halloween 3, Season of the Witch. This is a slightly different kind of conversation because Sara and I swerve back and forth between her book and the Halloween film, so much so that the themes of both kind of blend together in a slightly spooky, slightly silly concoction. I'll let the episode speak for itself, especially since it's so chock full of nostalgic ideas and writerly worries, and what I hope is some insight into the toll that selling art can take on the artists who make it. Sara Farizan is the author of several books for young readers, and during this episode, she explains what she does so well, I'll let her do just that, so we can all just jump right in. One more thing, apologies for any background noise in this episode. Both Sara and I had neighbors using leaf blowers and lawnmowers while recording. An indication of the season, right? Hope it's not too bothersome. The content warnings are now in the show notes, so if you like, check those out before listening. Now, turn down the lights, turn up the volume, and get ready to explore our first fears. Hello, Sara. How are you?
Hi, Dan. I'm great. It's the best time of the year.
It is.
Halloween.
Yes. And we are talking about one of the Halloween movies today, Halloween 3,
Yes.
that you suggested as a first fear. I'm so excited to get into this movie with you and to sort of talk to you about your book, Dead Flip,
Thanks.
which came out in paperback recently.
Yes.
And I read it and I loved it. It is filled with so much joy and creepiness and all of those things that just were touchstones to me in my own childhood, and I can't wait to get into that, as well as this sort of redheaded stepsister of the Halloween franchise.
Yeah. Thank you, Dan, for all those nice words. And yeah, I think so. I'm trying to pay tribute to my kid self by stepping out into horror, and also, but I think I'm also a chicken. I'm afraid of everything.
Really?
Oh, yes.
That's really surprising to me based on the amount of pop culture horror nuggets and pop culture nuggets in general that you put into your book. So I'm actually very surprised to hear that.
But you'll notice also the pop culture references that are in Dead Flip. Majority of them are horror comedies. So they're scary movies, but they are sort of goofy sometimes. They have moments of levity.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of horror that I enjoy.
Which your book totally, the plot of the book totally follows as well.
Yeah.
And you know what? I'm just putting that all together now. Yeah. So yes, it all makes sense.
I was just kind of trying to find all the stuff I like about Halloween time and childhood and all those kind of spooky things I liked that weren't too scary, and like paying homage to that media of the early 90s, late 80s. So like Erie, Indiana, Are You Afraid of the Dark, Goosebumps, even the Olsen twins, like Boil, Boil, Toil and Trouble, made for TV movie where they're like befriend a witch or something. So it's sort of paying homage to those things and the things I liked about being a kid in New England in the 80s and 90s. Yeah.
I was a kid in New England in the early 80s, at least.
Oh, wow. You look great. Couldn't tell.
Thank you. It's this moisturizer.
Great.
Started. Yes. It's under eye armor. I live by it.
Yeah. I either could buy Maybelline under eye concealer or find a vampire somewhere.
Yes. I'm just a vampire. Okay, Sara, so for our listeners, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your work, and what is your relationship to the horror genre, if you have one?
Well, Dan, first, thanks for having me, and thank you to the listeners. So I'm Sara Farizan. I primarily write young adult books. My first one came out in 2013. It was called If You Could Be Mine. So I have 4 young adult books, but Dead Flip is my first in the foray into the horror genre. I also write middle grade books. I did a middle grade graphic novel called My Buddy Killer Croc with DC Comics, which was a lot of fun, and a middle grade novel with Scholastic called Opportunity Knocks, which is not spooky. There's some magic, but it is not very horrific. And so I think I've mostly written stuff that I'm passionate about and is important to me. And but horror it was something this Dead Flip was really the book that I've enjoyed working on the most. So Dead Flip was really important to me because the characters that go on the adventure get to go on an adventure. Like they share aspects of my identities, but that's not the main plot.
Yeah,
And it's
I love that.
also, yeah, and it's also been fun because I love horror and horror comedies, I should say. But I'm afraid of everything. So it's hard to write a scary story when, the editor's like, well, scare yourself. And like, but everything scares me.
I want to say Dead Flip has this element to it that really captures, and I don't mean this in a negative way, because what you're doing is an homage and a sort of a love letter to the style
Mm-hmm.
of those late 80s, early 90s genre films, genre books, but it plays with almost the ridiculousness of some of those elements and some of the elements that we'll sort of uncover and hopefully explore in Halloween 3.
Yeah.
And I think that is part of what gives your book the charm, and I think it's kind of what you're talking about in terms of not wanting to scare yourself too badly,
Well, yeah, and just the fun of it. I think
Yeah.
a lot of people love Halloween, some people don't. But a lot of people love it, but like there are different levels of scare, right? They're like the diehard people that really love like a Saw or like enjoy that kind of thing, which I don't. And then there are people who really like the season. They like apple picking. They're into
Yeah.
like carving a pumpkin, but maybe don't watch too many scary things.
Yeah.
And there's something, and I think horror is a genre in which you can do so much. And I am afraid of everything. So I haven't seen all the movies or read all the books. But the thing about it is the premises are always so much more compelling to me than the
Hmm.
premises of like a literary novel or I shouldn't say literary, but like like a rom-com or something where like it's a lot of what if scenarios
Hmm.
that are unusual, and playing with like everyday life things.
Speaking of everyday life things, I want to sort of go back on what I said when I called your book ridiculous.
No, but it is
No,
because
no,
there
no,
are
but
there
but
are
speaking of everyday things,
yeah.
being the everyday thing as a cursed object, and the cursed object in your book is definitely hilarious. It's a hilarious cursed object. Do you want can you give the listeners just a brief like scenario synopsis of what Dead Flip is?
Sure. So Dead Flip is about 3 childhood best friends who on Halloween of 1987, so it's Corey, Maz, and Sam. Corey is the tomboy girl of the group. Maz is Iranian American, like I am, but he came here when I was 4. I'm born and raised here. And Sam is their friend that they're sort of emotionally outgrowing. He's not as socially he's not getting with the program. Like they're about to enter middle school, and Sam is sort of not emotionally where the other two are and has different family circumstances. And you can feel their friendship sort of fraying when they're 12 in 1987. On Halloween night, Sam goes missing, and Corey and Maz go to different schools. They become estranged, and they're both seniors at their respective high schools. And that's when Sam comes back, but he's still 12 years old, the age he was when he went missing. And it may or may not have to do with a pinball machine that eats people. Yeah.
That's what I was talking about, which
Well,
I
yes.
love.
And I think the plot is like literally outgrowing a friendship,
Yes.
right? Maz and Corey are both seniors in high school, and Sam's still 12. And I think that's a universal fear that many people have, where like, oh, my friends are going to leave me, or I'm not as cool as they are, or like, whatever happens in middle school to high school, there's that sort of fear. And I also, there's so many influences to this story, and some that I didn't even realize, like with the media that I was ingesting. But I did know it was going to be a pinball machine that did the, abduction. And that's really in the vein of like, I love Christine by Stephen King.
Yes.
It's one of my favorite novels of his, because it is young adult in a way. I mean, I know it's adult fiction because scary things happen, scarier than you're able to do in YA, but it's a coming of age novel, and it's about a boy in his car. And that car is obviously up to no good, which is a ridiculous premise and another John Carpenter film.
Yes.
But it is scary. But the idea of like a possessed object.
I have a question about cursed objects that I want to talk about later. But before that, a question that I'm asking all of my guests is, do you remember the first time you ever felt frightened?
Yes, I think I was like 2 or 3. And maybe I don't remember it. Maybe it's just because like people have told me the story. But when my parents would like go like to a dinner party or something, my grandmother and uncles would babysit me. Like, so they come to the house, and for whatever reason, like if they were gone longer than like 2 hours, I'd be like somebody's going to come in the house. Like, and my grandmother and uncles would be like, no, there's nothing wrong. Like nothing's going on. And apparently I kept saying like, like they'd put on the alarm or whatever. And I'd be like, it's not enough. It's not enough. So I don't know what home invasion I was thinking of or what prompted that thought. But yeah, so that I think like 2 or 3, like that's a big fear. But I don't have that fear now.
Yeah.
I'm mostly now just afraid of guns. I just assume everyone has a gun. Yeah. But I don't want to write about that in fun horror stuff either. But like straight up, like youngest fear, I think it was that, like being like, oh, like it's not enough. Like we don't have enough lights or security or whatever. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then when Home Alone came around, like a couple years later, I was like, oh, we'll be fine. I've just got some toys and I'll set up traps and,
Isn't that funny that something like that can sort of reassure you? I love that. I love it. I want to talk more about Dead Flip as we go.
Thank you.
But first, let's get into Halloween 3. Just for our listeners, to give them a rundown of what this is. It's a film from 1982. I believe last week was the anniversary of its release. I think it came out on October 22nd, 1982. Written and directed by Tommy Lee Wallace. I read that John Carpenter and Nigel Neal were uncredited writers as well. In IMDb, they said that. It's produced by Deborah Hill and John Carpenter, and probably Mustafa Akkad and Irwin Yablans, who are also uncredited. The cast is Tom Atkins as Daniel Chalice, Stacey Nelkin as Ellie Grimbridge, which is such a good name, Dan O'Herlihy as Connell Cochran, the evil old man, Garn Stevens as poor Marge. Oh my gosh, poor Marge. Nancy Keys as Linda Chalice. Al Berry plays Harry Grimbridge, Ellie's father, who starts off the whole troubles when he gets murdered at the beginning of the film. And then maybe the best name ever for any actor, Dick Warlock.
Yes.
Plays the assassin.
Who is also Michael Myers in Halloween 2 and was a stunt double for many years, especially for Kurt Russell, who was in a lot of Carpenter films.
It's a small world. It's all tied together, and it's all tied together by Halloween, I think.
Yeah, well, I also like that Deborah Hill and John Carpenter, they had this sort of like film family. So if you look at any of their films, there's ties to other projects they've done, and they kind of just stay very loyal to people that have worked well for them. And so it's nice to see, like, if you watch, like Escape from New York, like Tom Atkins has a small role in that. He's also in The Fog. So it's nice to see these kind of, like, they just think of their friends again, or people that they worked well with.
Since you brought Halloween 3 to the table to talk about, I guess I'm wondering how you first discovered this film, Halloween 3. How young were you?
Maybe 6 or 7. And this is kind of what I miss about network television. So we didn't have cable until I was 12. But I would watch cable at like my friend's house or my grandmother's place or things like that. But like, so you only had those like 5 or 6 channels. Channel 5, Channel 7, I think 10, and then 38 was the channel in which I saw Halloween 3 Season of the Witch.
You have an incredible memory for
38,
this.
yes. But that's where I saw a lot of, like, I saw Monster Squad on this kind of TV, and I think that's why it became a cult classic, because most kids ended up watching these movies that you're like, well, I guess this is on,
Yeah.
And like you would just watch something because that was it. It was the only game in town. You're like, okay, I can either watch the Siskel and Ebert review, which I did. But then
Yes,
when
of
that's
course.
over, what are you going to watch? So
Yeah.
there were all these things that I ended up ingesting or watching that wasn't because like I was like, oh, I'd love to watch, I'd rather watch like, I don't know, like The Little Mermaid or Ninja Turtles or something.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
So you kind of accidentally came to
but a lot of
the
a lot of
movie.
media that I ended up enjoying, I think, or things that I thought I made up, where I'm like, that surely can't have been a
Right.
film, and
Right.
it was.
That's a thing.
Yeah.
Like, I'm often like, wait a second, what is that? Did I dream that? But anyway, to get into Halloween 3,
Yes.
for our listeners, can you synopsize this film
Oh,
in any way? What do you remember of it, just so that we have a baseline for what we're talking about here?
I'll do my best.
Yes.
So Halloween 3 Season of the Witch is a departure from the Halloween franchise. It was actually the only Halloween movie I had seen because Michael Myers scared me too much. So this was basically like, I think the producers, Mustafa Akkad and all them, were like, hey, we want to keep this money train going. And John Carpenter was not interested in doing that because he felt that the first one was kind of what he'd wanted to do, and he already overextended himself with the second one. So he said, he and Deborah Hill were like, why don't we make it an anthology series? So like every Halloween movie, there would be like a new theme or a new plot. So like there would be one about, I don't know, aliens maybe, say, or one Halloween about little monsters or whatever they wanted to do. Just that Halloween was not only about Michael Myers. The problem with that is this plot has no Michael Myers in it. There's no Jamie Lee Curtis. There's no boogeyman. So the audience, thinking that they were going to get another Michael Myers movie, reacted so poorly. They're like, what is this? Like, I want my money back. Like, so they went back to Michael Myers from Halloween 4 on. But I actually think it was a brilliant idea. They just maybe didn't need to call it Halloween 3. They could have just called it Season of the Witch or called it some other title. And I think it would have found its audience back then as well as now.
Maybe along those lines, maybe if they'd even switched it around and said Season of the Witch, a Halloween story, or
Right.
something like
Any
that.
kind of, so that there's no worry about continuation or confusion. And also that was a time where like you got the movie trailer, but you couldn't Google anything. There's no internet. So you can't see like what the movie's about. You just sort of see the title and you go and you enjoy it or you don't. But Halloween 3 is about this gentleman who is brought into the hospital holding a Halloween mask and saying they're going to kill us all. They're all coming to kill us all. And there's a commercial playing, a jingle on a TV nearby for silver shamrock masks. And the man who is upset and then later is found dead in his bed by an assailant who puts himself on fire was holding a mask like the one in the commercial. So the doctor and the dead patient's daughter decide to investigate where was he, why was he holding this mask, why did he react to that commercial, and figure out what happened to this guy between when he left for this meeting in Santa Mira, California, where the Silver Shamrock Mask Company is, and when they found him in the hospital. So the mystery gets deeper and weirder and zanier. But it is a romp, to be sure. And I remember thinking too, when watching it on Channel 38, there were a lot of fears, because there's a scene in which there's a kid who is obnoxious. He's a terrible kid, but he's still a kid. And he's wearing one of the masks during the commercial as like a simulation to show what the grand plan is for these masks. And he meets a really horrifying demise. I
Mm-hmm.
remember that being the first time being like, oh my God, like that kid's not waking up. Like,
Oh no,
yeah,
he's the opposite of waking
no,
up.
there's a snake coming out of his mouth. I don't know how
Yeah,
that's happening. Like
yeah.
a lot of bugs. But I remember that being really horrifying. And also the end, in which you don't know if that last commercial is still on the air or not.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, in this show, I don't mind spoiling things.
I mean, the
So,
movie's like 40 years old. So
yeah, so I don't mind spoiling, for anybody who doesn't want to get spoiled. I mean, I guess stop here. Um, but I'll go on to sort of flesh out the master plan by this company, because
yes.
there's something I want to talk about regarding the themes of this movie in terms of a company being behind
Mhm.
all of these shenanigans. There's the character played by Dan O'Herlihy. His name's Connell Cochran. He's kind of this Svengali character in this small town, Santa Mira.
Santa Mira, yes.
There's a curfew
Yeah.
and nobody's allowed to be out after dark. It's a very strange kind of haunted place, and everybody kind of lives in deference to this Connell Cochran character who owns the Silver Shamrock Masks company. So Daniel and Ellie show up at this factory. They put on, fake personas to get access to the factory, although I think Connell Cochran knows exactly who they are. And they encounter the people working there, and they encounter how these things are being made. And in the background, we're also seeing some other people from the outside coming to the town to do business with the factory, one of whom is a character named Marge, and she's a saleswoman, and she's been having trouble with her orders. And one of the first things that we see as kind of like a mysterious thing is she finds this little
Like a
emblem.
microchip. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a microchip in the mask that she's been playing with. It pops off, and she's like scraping at the microchip with a hairpin or something, and all of a sudden it emits this like crazy beam of light that shoots into her mouth and sort of eviscerates her face in this horrifyingly grotesque way, and then like bug crawls out of her face, and it's like, what is going on? Tom Atkins and Stacey Nelkin are in a room next to this poor woman, Marge, who just has her face blown off, and they hear her scream. And Ellie and Daniel are sort of starting to like become romantic, and Ellie goes, "What was that noise?" And he goes, "Who cares?" And then
Well,
like gets
he's
back to necking with her.
he's in the throes of passion.
Yes, I'm
Um,
like, but you're here for a reason, sir.
yeah, I think it like that scene. As a kid, I was like, this seems weird, and like as an adult, I'm like, really? Like, but there has to be some reason why they don't save the day right away.
Sexy time.
What else will distract you but having sexy times? Yeah.
Having sexy times.
Also, another terrible thing about the sexy times is Dr. Shambliss asks Ellie after they've done the deed, like, how old are you?
Oh my God, I know.
Terrible. One, you should ask before.
Yes.
And two, if that's something that's on your mind, like maybe not someone you should have sexy time with. I don't know.
Lots of stuff from this movie that would not fly today, and I don't know why it flew back then, but this is Halloween 3. There's so much about this movie that's so bizarre. Anyway, they encounter Connell Cochran, the old evil man who's behind this, who actually has some history with the old ways, the Celtic gods, and it turns out that he and his company have stolen one of the large stones and spirited it away from Stonehenge, so that pieces of Stonehenge are being put into these microchips that are being placed into the masks. of these very popular silver shamrock masks. There's a witch, skeleton, and a pumpkin mask. And there's a little Easter egg in there that during one of the commercials they show, for half a blip of a second, a Michael Myers mask. I don't know if you probably knew that, but I thought that was a fun Easter egg. So like maybe there is kind of a hint that they made the Michael Myers mask as well. And what it turns out is that Connell, the old man in charge of the company, wants to have a massive sacrifice on Halloween to bring back the old Samhain ritual, and so that's what he's doing in terms of mass producing dangerous masks that will get triggered on Halloween night when all the children wearing them are sitting and watching the commercial for the quote unquote big giveaway that they keep advertising. So those are all the spoilers I think I wanted to mention first. But in terms of how this connects to you and your work, I wanted to read a quote from Dead Flip that made me think about something in terms of Halloween 3 and also nostalgic horror writ large. Maz says at a certain point regarding his missing friend, Sam, once something's gone, it's hard to get it back. And it's such a simple thought, it's such a simple premise. And I feel like what you're doing with that sentence is twofold. One of them is about looking back to the past. We as adults or young adults who also really like to look back at their own pasts and see how they've changed from childhood and how friendships change and all that. And that sort of brings us to this idea of nostalgia horror. I'm thinking of your mentioning a Monster Squad and Lost Boys and all of these things that I love and love to look back at. And I think that there's something about us as writers looking back to our childhood to mine for gold nuggets of story. Can you talk about that in terms of Dead Flip and what you were trying to do there? And maybe does this connect to Halloween 3 and our sort of fascination with wanting to go back and revisit it again and again as adults and enjoy this thing that we discovered when we were kids?
Yeah, I think, my relationship with nostalgia is one that I'm trying to be more healthy about. Where I think a lot of my hobbies and interests, especially in the pandemic, and have always been nostalgic, like very 80s, 90s focused, like pop culture focused. But I was worried that I wasn't being very present, and I think too, when things get scary, I have a tendency to like revert to childlike things and childhood things. For nostalgia purposes too, it can be so fun and it can be so fulfilling for a while. I think the problem with nostalgia is when we talk about like the good old days, right? We romanticize things and we focus on the nicer things and not the crap stuff. We have to ask, well, who were the good old days good for?
Yep.
And Sam's experience, he's trying to remind them of who they were as kids, which on the one hand is great because Corey and Maz kind of tap into their more truer selves with Sam being around, but also Sam's neglecting all the things that weren't great about their friendship and about a certain time. So I think with nostalgia, it can be fun and it can be great but just remember that time marches on and it's important to be present so you can be nostalgic about even when the present is hard. I think when things are difficult, horror especially, people turn to horror when things are scary in real life as an escape. But I think it's also something about nostalgia and being like, oh, I remember this, I love this. But like, what is it? What is the thing that you're trying to recapture? It might be maybe a more responsibility-free lifestyle. It might be like a person in your life who's passed. It might be something else that is triggering that isn't really to do with that object or that piece of art. It's more to do with like a time of your life. And I also
Yeah.
think with nostalgia, we kind of do romanticize in that, like, oh, that was so great. But you don't remember that, like, you hated that gym practice. That whole, like, Joni Mitchell, Janet Jackson, you don't know what you got till it's gone
Yeah.
thing. Oh,
Yeah. At the center of Dead Flip, and this is not really anything like Halloween 3. There's no
yeah.
young adult theme happening in Halloween 3, but really at the center of Dead Flip, it's a friendship story. And the way you tell the story, it flips back and forth in time to like preteen years to later teenage years, and before Sam disappears, and then what happens after Sam disappears. And the way that these three best friends move apart and change and change and change. And I feel like that's really at the heart of what Dead Flip is all about. Yes, there's a possibly supernatural occurrence here, and that's playing a part as well. But I feel like this story could remove all of the supernatural elements and still be compelling because the characters that you've written and their relationships are so strong and interesting that that really feels like the beating pulse of what Dead Flip is doing. And that kind of is like what I quoted Maz saying, once something's gone, it's hard to get it back. Nostalgia of us looking back at our past as adults, reading a young adult book, and what these kids are doing, struggling with how their friendships have so swiftly changed.
Also, when I was writing it, I think I was also dealing with the fact that, like, good friends that I've had, I don't talk to as much anymore. And it's not that I don't like them, it's just like they live far away or they've started their own families, or like those are just things that happen when you get older. And also playing with time. So there's flashbacks to 1987, and then the present day of the book is 1992. But a lot of looking back on the 80s and 90s, as a kid, great, loved it, had a good time. I imagine if I were the adult I am now in the 80s and 90s, probably wouldn't have a great time. And John Carpenter did this a lot in his films of the 80s too. He's not a fan of Reaganomics, He's
Oh,
not a
oh,
fan of,
oh, he was
yeah.
so political.
Um,
Love him.
yeah, and like They Live,
They Live is
Halloween
incredible.
3, all these movies that are really a what are we doing in this decade? Like, greed is not good kind of thing. But as a kid, it felt great, especially if your parents had dough. You were like, yeah, this is great. I can go do these things. Everything's so optimistic, everything's so bright colored, everything's so fun. Like they're
Yeah,
marketing toys to me during the Macy's Thanksgiving Day parade. Like everything is a commercial. Like this is
yeah,
awesome. The stuff of the 80s and 90s, yeah, the economy was good for most people, but there were a lot of people who got left behind. And in the friendship, we see that with Sam and Maz, especially where Maz's family is like ascending socioeconomically, whereas Sam's is not. Sam's is not doing great. She's a single parent household. They're moving to Florida. Like job opportunities are not always consistent. Maz has, of course, dated a lot of girls since Sam has gone missing, and Sam doesn't feel like he's still 12, right? And so
yeah.
Sam is like, we used to be best friends. And then with Corey, the growing apart part with Sam is the one, Corey is gay and in the closet, and 1992 is not a great time to be out and about. Corey kind of had to let go of her hobbies because they were seen as more masculine at that time, right? Which is so messed up. But that's sort of the messaging she gets from her family and her sister and her, to survive in high school, you kind of have to let go of the things that you enjoyed, which were more tomboyish. In getting together with Sam again, it's great because he's bringing up all the stuff that she really loved and also getting the heart of the matter. Like, oh, your new friend Janet seems cool, which Corey's like, of course she's cool. I'm in love with her. I just can't do anything
Hmm.
about it. I think that was so fun to play with. And to your point, like those are scenes that could happen if Sam, let's say, was also a senior in high school, but he visited back from another school. And these are things
Yeah,
we have to hash out.
yeah.
But because horror, you can do so many things where you can talk. It's like a Trojan horse. So the pinball machine is a Trojan horse for talking
Mm,
about other stuff.
yeah. Halloween 3 has a lot of Trojan horses to talk about
Yeah.
bigger things as well. But getting back to the idea of Sam having disappeared and then come back a little bit different. There's a scene, and this is also a big spoiler for near the end of Halloween 3, where Daniel and Ellie have gotten rid of Silver Shamrock. The factory is on fire. They are running. And Ellie had been separated from Daniel for some time. She had been taken by the corporation. The corporation has these very well-dressed goons who do the dirty work of silencing people and cleaning up messes and making more messes. So Ellie's been separated from Daniel, and when they return together and run away, it turns out that that's not Ellie. She's been turned into a killer robot, and there's this incredible scene where she and Daniel end up fighting. But Sam, your character in Dead Flip, also disappears for some time. His being missing has affected their emotional lives and all that stuff, but he comes back changed as well. I guess my question is kind of vague in that I'm trying to draw connections between this moment in Halloween 3 and in Dead Flip. What is it about somebody who goes away and comes back changed? Is that necessarily a supernatural fear? Can that be tied to real life fears as well?
I think it's both. I think it's a lot of things. And I didn't realize until revisiting Halloween 3 because of you and this podcast and watching it for fun, how much I've actually taken from that movie for Dead Flip, and I didn't realize. So the Connell Cochran character, for instance,
This was in my notes.
who I love so much, and he's so evil. I think really is Mr. Davenport from
Mm-hmm.
Dead Flip, which I didn't recognize as I was writing it. You know, I was just thinking of
Absolutely.
evil guy, like there are no killer robots in Dead Flip. Yeah, and also I think, you know, we're all changing all the time. Like maybe your essence is the same, but as time goes on, you hopefully evolve or unfortunately things happen that are sad, and that does affect and change a person. I think with Sam, like the going away and coming back different, he to me is a bit Bart Simpson, a bit like Village of the Damned Children, a bit like, you know, Carol Ann from Poltergeist, but
Oh,
you know,
nice.
like she was in the TV and now she's not.
Yes.
There are all these kind of things I've put in a blender that obviously made a very big impression, and you're transforming it in such that I think in the beginning it was difficult because I'm putting all this stuff, all the tropes and all the things that like I love of this genre. But I think at one point I was putting too many things and getting away from the core relationship of these three kids. There was like a lot of stuff that I was getting away from these three, and I don't know why I
Interesting.
was doing that.
That friendship really is the heart of this book. But I think I am fascinated by the concept because I see this over and over again, and I've used it myself many times, of the threat of the elderly white man, right?
Yeah.
And so Mr. Davenport is definitely one of those.
Yes.
I want to read something that you wrote. Mr. Davenport is no longer around technically,
Mm-hmm.
and you write, hanging above a fireplace behind the desk was an oil painting of Mr. Davenport. He was younger than the photo we'd seen in his obituary. Here, he had blonde hair and more weight on his bones, but the same unforgettable cold eyes looked out at us, a piercing gray gaze that somehow said, "You are small, you are weak, how dare you come here?" And I
I
think
wrote
that,
that. Wow, that's not bad.
yeah, yeah, I think those last three sentences are so important
Mm.
in what we're talking about in terms of who this archetype is,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because that's a real person. We all know that person.
Mm.
That person is in the news every day, you know?
Yeah, I think also, especially growing up in New England and just seeing all those stories and again, Connell Cochran, who you know is a proud Irishman, but I don't think that I've been to Ireland once and they were all lovely, and I don't think they would approve of Connell Cochran. But just the idea, and Dan O'Hurley, he plays him so well. Like there's a
Yeah.
moment that still scares me where he's with like a group, but like the goons are kind of asserting themselves. And Dan O'Hurley is smiling, but his smile sort of turns into this like sinister sneer that's like it's half a second, but you can see it after you know the whole movie. And
Yeah.
it's so delicious and scary. But I think too, like, because it's a movie about the excess of 80s and the stuff of 90s, and how do people make such economic gains,
Hmm.
usually not by the greatest means. There are a lot of very hardworking people who specialize in a field, and that's wonderful, and that can afford you a very nice life. But for the most part, for people
Yeah.
that have like generational wealth, and there were probably some not great moments in history that they benefited from.
Yeah.
Yeah, now, but after revisiting Halloween 3 this month, I think Connell Cochran really influenced Mr. Davenport quite a bit. The idea that like I don't read reviews, but like a friend of mine was doing it, and I'm like, please don't, like, but she was just reading some like positive things. And one of them made me laugh so hard. It was like the person had said, and the real villain was capitalism the whole time, which was not my intention, but
I don't think
yeah,
I don't get that from this book. And
I
even
don't
if
either. But
even if that's what you intended, like,
yeah,
so
I don't
like
I
even
don't think so. I think it was just a sort of like, again, the good old days. Who are they good for? How does
yeah.
this, like, what I love about the 80s is all the optimism, and like it's
Hmm.
morning in America, and here we are, and isn't it great, and all these
Ignoring
we are
the
ignoring, like,
pandemic, the HIV and
yes,
AIDS crisis,
yeah,
the racism, like
we're
redlining,
cutting
all of that
all the
stuff.
like art programs, so now you don't have singers anymore.
Mm,
Basically,
yeah.
we're giving you ketchup instead of tomatoes because that's a vegetable, isn't it? As much as I don't like the 70s as a decade, like, it's never intrigued me. I feel it's very drab and orange, and like
Mm,
there is something about the 70s that had more community to it. Like, people were more invested in one another. 80s is
yeah.
very like, how can I get ahead?
Oh,
What's
absolutely.
the thing?
The me decade, right?
Yeah, so I think Mr.
I think,
Davenport is sort of he is a person that embodies a lot of not great stuff.
yeah,
And he has a niece who's lovely, Lizzie, who
yeah.
helps the kids out, but also did not benefit from having a wealthy uncle.
I don't personally do not see the point that whoever wrote that review was saying your book is about capitalism being bad. I mean, in Halloween 3, I can see it,
Yes, in a lot
right?
of John Carpenter films.
Yes.
I so
So, like,
I I'm not that deep that I can, but I think it's great when people get all kinds of stuff from work. Like,
yeah,
they have their own feeling and interpretation. But John
yeah,
Carpenter, yeah, he was not a fan of the excess, and I think you can see that in a lot of his work.
yeah. Here's a corporation. I don't know how this mask company is making so much money or has so much power. They're making literally handmade hand
Yeah,
poured rubber masks.
well,
There's not really even like the Ford factory line existing in this factory. It seems very small. However, the idea of commercialism is
mhm,
corporations trying to do the big bad thing,
mhm.
and Dead Flip does touch a little bit about on that. Like, somebody said, I'm not going to say who, but somebody says, somebody who's not so nice in your book, we were just sacrificial lambs to you. And the person answers, no, you were also customers.
Yeah. You were also customers. I think with Halloween 3, there's so much that's talking against commercialism. So the jingle, the commercial that we keep seeing, which is basically London Bridge is falling down, but it's counting down the days to Halloween, where it's like 8 more days till Halloween.
Yeah.
And we have 4 more days, right? So we should do that.
Yeah.
4 more days till Halloween.
But when this airs, I'm
Shamrock.
putting this live on Halloween,
Oh,
so
great.
it'll
Okay.
be on
1 more day
Halloween.
till Halloween. Today is Halloween.
Today is
Silver
Halloween.
Shamrock, yeah. So there's a lot of that commercial, which also speaks to deregulation in the 80s. So I read this great graphic novel I highly recommend to everyone by Brian Box Brown called it's like how toy companies shaped your childhood. Let me find the title right now. But it basically talks about the He-Man effect. How American Toy Makers Sold You Your Childhood by Brian Box Brown. And it's basically talking about how in the 80s there was deregulation. So all these toy companies made these half-hour cartoons that we all love.
Yep.
And that you watched every day. And the purpose of the cartoon was to sell you a product. So there was no sort of delineation. Like a kid could not maybe be like, I like this cartoon. It's so fun. I want that toy. And so there was a lot of that, which I loved. I loved being marketed to as a kid. But is that a great practice? Probably not. That's why you have like the Cabbage Patch Kid fights in
Oh my gosh.
toy stores and that kind of thing. So that's an exploration of that sort of commercialism. How do we get the kids to buy the product and, that sort of money-making thing. The other thing about Connell Cochran is his employees are all robots, right?
Right.
Which is like Amazon going that way. So he probably saves a lot on
overhead.
Yeah, there's no union at Silver Shamrock. There's no employee benefits or health insurance because they're robots. I mean, maybe he has to maintain them and hopefully they don't become too sentient. But and I think everyone in the town, from what I feel like most of the town people are also robots.
Possibly. There's an argument that even Ellie from the beginning was a robot.
Was a robot, yeah.
And I don't buy that. I don't buy it because why? Why try and lure Daniel Chalice into this plot line in the first place? If she didn't show up, he would have just been like, oh, that's a weird thing that happened in my hospital. Next.
I could see that if he started investigating before she shows up, but she shows up and then they start investigating. So that
I think she was changed when she was kidnapped. I think.
Yeah. And also that would make the lovemaking really
right. And it already is bizarre.
It's uncomfortable. Which actually the actress Stacey Nelkin, is that her name?
Yeah, Nelkin.
She said Tom Atkins was really great and made her feel comfortable. Which I'm like, yeah, Tom Atkins.
Tom Atkins, just classic 80s horror.
And isn't
hero? Love him.
Wife, his real life wife in Halloween 3? I think she's Marge, right?
I think she's the one who gets her face blasted open
off while he's sleeping with someone else.
And his response is, "Who cares?
Who cares?
It's your wife, dude."
I think if I were, I don't know. And also, he has an alcohol problem. A doctor who hangs out in a bar during his break is maybe not someone you'd want to practice with patients. But I also love Tom Atkins in Night of the Creeps, which is a great fun time. Yeah. Talk about ridiculous. That's a good movie. Yeah.
Absolutely I love a ridiculous 80s horror film with the special effects that are animated lightning bolts. I love that stuff.
They loved many animated lightning bolts in the 80s. Poltergeist, they even show up coming out of the TV. Gremlins 2 in 1990, that gremlin that's just electricity just going all over the place.
Oh my God, Gremlins 2. I just saw it in the theater with some friends a couple months ago, maybe for the first time in decades.
Wow.
And talk about scathing indictment of capitalism.
Yeah, Joe Dante.
It's incredible that these big movie studios were putting these films out that were about big corporations. It's funny. It's the way that the Simpsons often makes fun of the Fox network.
Yes. But also interesting that these filmmakers that sort of had their heyday in the 80s, so a Joe Dante, a John Carpenter, are then making these films that are all this money you're giving us, I'm enjoying it, but also what are we doing? What is the and Gremlins too, it's just Joe Dante really didn't want to do it. And they were like, we'll give you whatever budget. And he's like, okay. Something about these artists who are artists, but they're now being given these big budgets and these, and what is their response to it? They love cinema, they love film, but what about the culture that is bothering them?
Yeah, I think it says a lot, at least in terms of John Carpenter, how he has retreated in years and sort of I wouldn't say he's jaded, but he's just honest and he speaks his mind and he has strong opinions. And I was just listening to a podcast, Postmortem, with Mick
Oh, I
Garris.
love that podcast. Yeah.
Yeah, Mick Garris just announced he's ending it at the end of this
Oh
year.
no. Oh,
And so he was talking with John Carpenter, and John Carpenter was just kind of like, you know what? I spend Halloween, like, hopefully there's basketball on.
yeah.
Like he's like, I want to play my video games.
Yeah.
Like
He makes
he
music
kind of
now.
he makes music. He kind of did retreat from the Hollywood game in a way. And I mean, I'm sure he's living just fine. I
Yeah.
mean, he probably wasn't ever necessarily about that money. He might have been like, I want to make films, I want to tell stories.
Yeah.
And maybe when the game got too annoying for him, he was just like, I'm taking my toys and leaving the playground.
Well,
Bye.
also, that Tommy Lee Wallace directs Halloween 3, right?
Yeah.
Who also directed It, the miniseries, and in his
Oh,
own
I didn't know
right.
that.
Yeah, in his own right is a really talented filmmaker.
Yeah.
So I think like passing the reins to someone who had worked with Carpenter and was like, okay, you can do this. Also, Alan Howarth, who does a lot of the music with John Carpenter for Halloween 3 and a lot of other films. I think it's like, after The Thing, it was not a commercial success. And I feel like that's Carpenter's love letter. Like he loved that Howard Hawks original film and he was like, I'm going to do this. And he made such an amazing film that we now enjoy. But at the time, it was sort of like his career was on the line. So that's why he ends up doing Christine sort of for the money. And he has a decent time on it, but it's not like what he usually does, which is, feel so passionate about a thing. And I think when the passion goes and when you're also like, what am I doing this for?
Mhm.
I worry about that too. I don't know how you feel about writing. Like I love it and I enjoy it and I always want to do it, but sometimes I'm like, what am I doing? Like it's tough to sustain a passion, particularly when that passion is something you now see as work.
Oh, absolutely. My entire brain changed once I got my first book deal, which was a while ago now, but I do often reminisce on the times, like
Yes.
speaking of nostalgia, I reminisce on the times before where it just was for fun. It was for me. It was experimental. It was to see how something could work or not work. I could throw things out without having any emotional response to
Yeah.
it. It wasn't about like, how am I going to pay my bills? How am I going to pay my
Mhm.
bills? How am I going to be paying my bills?
Mhm.
And that's the scary thing
Yeah.
to me now. It's like, I'm paying my bills, but like, what if all of a sudden I can't?
It does bring me joy, but not in the same way that when I would write to escape. And now the writing there's some escapist elements in it. Of course, something like Dead Flip, which was super fun, but that it is there's a deadline now. Like you're afforded less time.
Beyond the writing aspect of it too, what really sort of saps my soul is the idea of constantly trying to engage now with social media. And I
I
know
hate
a lot
it.
of people have retreated from that, but it makes me feel like I don't want to participate.
Yeah. Mhm.
And bringing this back to Halloween 3 and all this, like, and John Carpenter and Tommy Lee Wallace and all these people who did these amazing things. How do you sustain that? And like, as the world changes,
Mhm.
as the new technology comes out and we have to keep up, like, I mean, I just sound like old man shouting at cloud right now, but,
Okay, it's your podcast.
but,
You can do it.
like it's exhausting to me.
Yeah,
I'm not saying I won't do it. I want to support my books. I want to support the
sure.
publishers who are putting money into supporting me. I'll do it. I'm happy to. And this whole podcast is part of that.
Yeah.
It's me trying to connect with people and
Mhm.
not only try and like lift people up and help support their work, but also help me sort of
Sure.
stay engaged in communication and ideas and inspiration, hoping to find those little sparks that are exciting.
Yeah. The issue then for me personally has been I don't want to commodify myself. The whole point of writing is that I don't have to be a public facing person.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think there are people that do it extremely well who they are good writers and also know how to TikTok or know how to do, and that's awesome. And I just feel really uncomfortable doing it. I'm not good at it. And I think people can tell when you're not enjoying it or not good at it. So
Probably.
we're treated in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But I also know that like my mental health is so important.
Oh, yeah.
And I can be a personality when I'm doing an event or even like being a part of your community. Like if you're a writer and you don't feel great about social media, you can engage with your local bookstore. You can go to the library. You can see what's going on at the schools. And if they want to, there are other things that also work
Yeah.
that maybe aren't on the scale that you'd like. But it's for me, it's also like the older I get, I don't want to. Like I don't want to. Sometimes it feels gross, especially when
Mhm.
like, there's other things going on that make you feel like, how can I self promote? But you have to do it, right? So it's sort
Yeah.
of like this balance of like what feels good to you, what feels important, and what's not going to burn you out, and like all these kind of things that are
It's the Halloween mask you put on and then snakes burst out of your face.
yes, that's social media. It's the
Yeah, that's social media.
yeah, it's the microchip that's impacted by a Stonehenge rock.
Yeah, there's something to the ending of Halloween 3 where Tom Atkins' character has escaped the killer robot. He's escaped the factory. He makes it back to this garage where some trick-or-treaters have come in, and he is on the phone with the TV station saying, "Don't play the commercial, don't play the commercial." And the kids are in front of the television, the commercial. Like there's 3 channels because it's 1982.
Mm-hmm.
And he gets through to one channel and they take the commercial off. He gets through to another channel, they take the commercial off. But the third channel is playing this commercial, and there's kids there and they're wearing the masks. And he's on the phone desperately, knowing his own kids are probably out there wearing the
Mm-hmm.
masks. And he's shouting, "Stop it, stop it, stop it, stop it, stop it." And he looks right into the camera and he's like, "Stop it, stop it."
Yeah. Stop
And
it! And then
stop it. And that's the end.
yeah.
And it's kind of like, I don't want to be flip and say like that's me sort of shouting into the social media landscape, but also like it's what Tommy Lee Wallace, it's what the producers of this film were saying, and like it's so in your face, like
Yeah.
stop it, stop it, stop it. And this was what, 41 years ago that movie came out, and I feel like just like Network, I'm,
Oh yeah.
that famous
I'm
line,
mad
like
as hell and I'm not gonna take it anymore. Yeah.
it's like a rallying cry, and I think that might be why the movie sort of has, although it sort of flopped and was not popular at first, it has sort of come back as a cult favorite.
Yeah.
And I think that those little things about it, like the message behind it, not that a movie has to have a message, but this one definitely does. I think it resonates with a lot of people right now, especially a lot of people our age.
No matter what if you like social media, great. If you don't, also great. Like a story has to be good enough that like it's out there, right? So however well a story is received, or however, like same with Halloween 3,
Yeah,
right? Was not a commercial success. Like bummer for the people involved. Mustafa Akkad is like, all right, we're going back to Michael Myers.
yeah,
Like the potential of that anthology died. So there's a lot of sad that goes with that. But to see the legacy the film has, whatever your thoughts on it, if it's a little goofy, but it still has that incredible story, which is this evil maniacal plan that centers around trick-or-treating and Halloween,
hmm,
and that there's other things that are also true, like commercialism, marketing, like corporate greed. There's a point in Halloween 3 where after Conal Cochran has revealed his evil plan, and like they're getting ready for, Dr. Atkins is like, he's escaped from the room, and like the time is ticking down, and like the big giveaway commercial is going to go. There's a point where Conal Cochran is on the phone with someone and he says, "Oh, 40 share, you don't say," or whatever, like
ah,
the stock market. Where as a kid, you're like, what's happening? Ah! But as an adult, I'm like, oh, even in this, like, he's getting a like celebratory call about like, oh, your shares are doing really well. Silver Shamrock is through the roof. Like these masks this year, boy, oh boy, they're
yeah,
really. And there's something about that that's so, like, what is an indicator of doing well? right? Which I struggle with too. Like I don't think I'll ever have a book that's like on a New York Times bestseller list. I don't think I'll have a book that has that sort of wide reach, right? But,
I don't be so sure about that, but also, yes, I
but
understand.
you know, whatever the markers are that I think people are like, well, how'd it do? And I'm like, I don't know. It's
Yeah.
okay, I guess. Like I get to write another book, but I think there's that also thing where now that's my Connell Cochran with the like 40 share. Like even for him, where he's about to do this really terrible, evil thing that he's sought through and he's really planned and this is his goal, he's still fielding that call to be like, wow, I guess I'm doing pretty great, huh? Like
Yeah.
um, the success is being able to have a childhood dream, be able to play with your other childhood hobbies and whatever, and be able to give that to another kid.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I think Halloween 3, that Connell Cochran, he was gonna exterminate a lot of children through a really annoying jingle.
Yeah. So I think to finish up, I wanted to ask a question. Can we talk about pinball for a second?
Sure, I'd love to. Yeah.
So yeah, so pinball machines, cursed pinball machines, haunted pinball machines. Aside from the supernatural aspect, I want to ask you, what is your favorite pinball machine and what makes a good game?
So as a kid, I think the game I played the most, because I didn't have like I would go to arcades a lot, but not with the frequency of like a kid of the 80s. I think the Addams Family game, I played that a lot. I also really enjoyed the Twilight Zone pinball game. But I think I was playing to like a lot of IP stuff, so a lot of intellectual property branded games. Whereas why I picked Sorcerer as a game was because one, it's a little on the nose, right? Sorcerer.
Yeah.
But the design of the game, like they're the two red eyes that are staring at you, which that is already giving a lot. And the commands that the game was giving, like it does say things like "feel my power" and like all.
Yeah.
When Dead Flip,
Which is a very elderly white man thing to
yes,
say.
yes, and so Mr. Davenport was like, "That's the game for me." Okay, I guess. Recently, I had the good fortune of one of the great things about the novel Dead Flip is I don't know if you feel this way too, Dan, but like getting to meet readers, getting to meet different people, like we would not have had this great conversation had I not written the book. Like that's the big part of it too, is like getting to meet people who are like-minded and you can talk about this fun stuff. So when Dead Flip was announced that it was going to be a book, OG Dead Flip, the one and true Dead Flip, Jack Danger, who has a website and company and empire called Dead Flip, was like, "What's this? I didn't know I had a book." So I was like, "Oh dear." And I reached out to him and I was like, "Jack, I'm so sorry. This is what the marketing team came up with. My working title was Friends Forever. Like they thought Dead Flip would be more evocative because it's a horror book and that's the term in pinball when but also it works because Sam, they thought he was dead and he's not. So I and Jack's so great and he was like, "No worries. I love reading. Like no problem." And he lives in Chicago. And so I sent him a copy of the book, like signed, like, "Thanks so much." I'm like, sorry about that.
Oh,
So I
wow.
was in Chicago for a school visit recently and I emailed him but I was like, "Hey, Jack, I know this is random, but you said if I'm ever in Chicago, like to hang out." And he did. And we went to a pinball barcade. And it was like walking in with the king of the castle, like
Wow.
the mayor of Pinball Town. And there was a pinball convention at the end of the week.
Oh my God.
There were all these people coming in from like Amsterdam and wherever to like talk pinball. Like that's the whole. And so I got to play pinball with him, which was like this incredible gift. And there were games like that he had helped with, like the Foo Fighters pinball game that like when
Yeah.
you do a code, like his face shows up and it says Dead Flip. We
Wow.
exchanged gifts. I gave him some books. He gave me but it was such a, like, we didn't pay for any drinks. Like people just came up to him and was like, "This is like the pinball guy," but like didn't say that. And they'd come up to him and be like, they didn't know who I was. And they were like, "Oh, I can't believe you're just here for fun," because like this has been his whole life and vocation. And so there's a whole community of people that I would love to get to know and meet and do all
Yeah,
that. But like it was like playing checkers with a chess master, like,
I bet.
and it was incredible. But yeah, so I love pinball, and I was respectable. Like I didn't
Yeah.
embarrass myself in
I
front
was going to ask you,
of
how good are
demand
you?
pinball, but I don't have like a machine in my house or one with great frequency that I can play that often. So,
Mhm.
but I have a lot of enthusiasm for a certain era of arcade. To research Sorcerer, the pinball machine that is in Dead Flip, I had never actually played Sorcerer. So I had to Google, okay, where can I find this machine? Like, so I can play it. And I've seen YouTube and stuff, but I hadn't like played it. So there's a place in Rhode Island called Free Play that
Oh
is
my
also a
God.
barcade. It opens at 5 p.m. where you pay like $10 at the door and you can play all the games you want. And they have so many games.
I might have to make a trip
Please
there.
do, and we'll
Yeah.
go together. I would really enjoy it.
Yeah. I went to a barcade. I think it's called Bit Bar in
Yes, in
Salem.
Salem. Yeah, yeah.
And I played an Elvira pinball
I
game.
love that. Yes.
And
Yeah.
there's a couple of them, but it's the one where she says, "Let's party."
Yeah.
And there's an image of her right between the two flippers, and she lights up there. And I looked it up. I was like, I want this. I want this pinball machine. I actually did research. I was like, oh, I can either buy this Elvira pinball machine
Mm-hmm.
or put a new roof on my house.
The roof is probably the priority. If Dead Flip ever became financially sort of, like it was a movie or something, I would get myself a
There you
pinball
go.
machine for my place. But no, I think,
But in the meantime, we have these special
you
places
can
that
visit
cater
these
to
places.
us.
It's okay. And also, like, I would think if after reading Dead Flip, maybe a kid thinks twice about a pinball machine. They walk by and they're like, I don't know, that one that's in the corner.
Yeah. Maybe I should pick up a book instead.
Yeah. Or call up an old friend.
Call up an old friend. Yes, exactly.
Or, watch Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, in which when you're too scared, you can turn off the TV. It's okay. Like,
yeah.
And that TV hopefully doesn't possess you like in Poltergeist. Basically, you're not safe anywhere. There's some object, there's some it's like Rockwell's Somebody's Watching Me.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Rockwell. Terrifying music video.
And there's nothing you can do about it. And now you're even adding to the surveillance by posting a TikTok that says, "Hey guys, I've got a new book coming out. Wanna read it? Okay, bye."
I think we have reached the zenith of what we can talk about in terms of cursed objects, the cursed masks of Halloween 3.
No more.
Yes. Oh my God. There's even something about that song that feels cursed. So I want to thank you so much for taking all of this time to speak with me. I loved your book and I can't wait to read more. And I hope you revisit the scary stuff because you're good at it.
Thanks, Dan. That means a lot coming from you because I never can tell.
No. Fantastic. And anybody listening to this on Halloween, if you're looking for a Halloween hangover book, go pick up Dead Flip. It's in paperback. It is a perfect Halloween book, like perfect. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Dan. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much to Sara Farizan, who gets the honor of longest interview recording I've had yet. There was so much more to our conversation that I felt horrible cutting out, and which I just might use for a bonus episode with all those goodies. Again, her recent horror novel, Dead Flip, is available now. And I meant every word of what I said about it. It's creepy, but not too creepy, and perfect for a young reader who likes a dose of realistic friendship drama with their haunted pinball machines. Please subscribe to Our First Fears, wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you'd like, you can follow our social media at Our First Fears, one word, on the site formerly known as Twitter, as well as on Instagram. You can also reach out at ourfirstfears@gmail.com. If you do want to get in touch, let me know. Do you own any cursed objects? What are they? And what weird powers do they wield? Thanks again for your precious time. I'm Dan Poblocki, wishing you sweet dreams and pleasant nightmares.